Well, he sure looks like Batman. It's hard to tell because the picture's dark black and white, but if you look closely, you can see the costume is two-toned, which is a nice break from the traditional all-black costumes we've been getting. Also, it's strange we haven't seen a live-action Batman with short ears since Adam West. Also, the Bat logo is huge. I mean, it's almost identical to the way Frank Miller drew it in his seminal work, The Dark Knight Returns. In fact, this whole costume is basically the Dark Knight Returns costume made live action. And that's where my problem lies. First of all, this isn't a critique on the costume itself. The costume itself looks fine. Really good, even. This is more of an observation on what I feel the mindset of the production of this movie is going to be, and it's slowly confirming a little fear of mine. See, back in 1986, writer-artist Frank Miller released a 4-part miniseries collectively known as The Dark Knight Returns. The story takes place when Bruce Wayne is in his 50s, after being retired from Batman for over 10 years. Crime is higher than it's ever been before, society is on a downward spiral, doctors are letting patients out of Arkham because there's no Batman around to be mean to them. Really, that's the excuse. And Ronald Reagan is president. So it's pretty much your typical 80s dystopia story. All this slowly causes Bruce Wayne to snap and become Batman one more time to bring the world justice the only way he knows how. Along the way, he meets a new female Robin. He defeats the running gang that's currently ruling Gotham City. He fights the Joker one last time. And he beats the crap out of Superman. This story is often considered one of the greatest comics of all time and is often considered the best Batman story ever told. And while I wouldn't go that far, it certainly does deserve a lot of the praise it gets. It breaks down Batman and superheroes in general in a way that had never been seen before up until that point. It came out around the same time as Watchmen, and those two books delivered a 1-2 punch that basically showed that comics can be more than just a kid's medium, that they can be something for adults as well. And while The Dark Knight Returns is great, and you should definitely read it if you haven't already, it's a little overrated if you ask me. Now, hear me out. This book is often credited with being the first dark and serious Batman story that completely washes away the stench of the old Adam West show. First of all, that show is amazing, and everybody knows that no matter how hard they try to hide it. Second, and perhaps most importantly, this is not the first dark and serious Batman story. By a long shot. Since the late 60s, writers and artists like Dennis O'Neil, Neil Adams, Steve Englehart, Marshall Rogers, and many, many more have been writing serious Batman stories that try to show that there are other sides to this character than just what was shown on TV. Stories like Joker's 5-Way Revenge, The Laughing Fish, Daughter of the Demon, these are all stories that predate Dark Knight Returns and all show Batman in a more adult light that had never been seen up until that point. And third, yes, it is one of the best Batman stories. I stress one of the best, not the best Batman story. Long Halloween, The Killing Joke, Son of the Demon, Black Mirror, hell, even Miller's own Batman Year One are all superior to The Dark Knight Returns in many respects. I guess you could call Dark Knight Returns the most mainstream of these stories, though. It's the one that everybody latches onto for some reason. People like, oh, I don't know, mainstream Hollywood? Every time a new live-action Batman movie is in development, it seems like the studio goes out of their way to tell people that Dark Knight Returns is going to be an influence on it, as if that'll calm people's nerves. Which is fine, because, like I said, it's a great Batman story, but it's not the only Batman story. I think part of the reason why I love the Christopher Nolan Batman movies so much is because filmmakers would always talk about the different Batman comics that would influence them. And when you see the movies, you can definitely see all the individual comics that they're inspired by. And it's not always just Dark Knight Returns. Batman Begins was specifically based on Year One, The Man Who Falls, The Long Halloween. The Dark Knight was also based on The Long Halloween, but also The Killing Joke and the first appearance of the Joker and Batman Issue 1. Dark Knight Rises was based on Nightfall, No Man's Land, and more specifically The Dark Knight Returns, more so than the other two. So for anybody out there who's mad at Dark Knight Rises because, oh, Batman would never retire, go read Dark Knight Returns and shut the hell up, please. Now back to the Batfleck picture. It's clearly based on Frank Miller's artwork. And that really shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody. When they announced this film at San Diego Comic-Con last year, they had actor Harry Lennox come out and read an excerpt from Dark Knight Returns, from the scene where he fights Superman. And then Zack Snyder basically went out of his way to say that Dark Knight Returns was a direct influence on the story. Which, okay, great, that's fine. But that one scene is just a small piece of a whole 75 years of history between those two characters. I guess this really shouldn't be a shock. I mean, Zack Snyder did direct 300, which is also based on a Frank Miller work, and the two have been best friends ever since. I'm assuming they're best friends. I mean, they did the DVD bonus features together, and they're all smiling and happy and whatnot. And that film came out 2 years after Sin City, another film based on Miller's work, which he actually co-directed along with Robert Rodriguez. So at that time, Hollywood was riding high on Frank Miller. And then the Spirit movie came out, which Miller directed on his own, and everybody just pretty much forgot about him, which is how Hollywood works, that fickle bitch. But it gave mainstream audiences a chance to see the Frank Miller that we comic book readers have known for the past 10 years. This was a man who once wrote Batman as a crusader against corruption and greed amongst society's higher-ups, and then made a story where Batman lights bad dudes on fire and then has sex with Black Canary in front of those bad dudes on fire. Listen, just throw a rock on the internet and you will hit a million different sites that'll tell you about Frank Miller's trajectory from up here to down here really quickly. It's kind of like the opposite of the Drake song. But with the most recent 300 movie actually being okay from what I've heard, and the new Sin City movie coming out later this year, it looks like Frank Miller's making a comeback in Hollywood. Somehow. I guess he's becoming mainstream again, and I guess that means he's mainstream enough to name drop as an influence for your upcoming Batman movie. Now, I don't want people to think I'm jumping on the hate bandwagon for this movie. I'm not. I'm trying to be as open-minded as I possibly can. But when you get specific by saying Dark Knight Returns is your influence, and pretty much only saying that Dark Knight Returns is your influence, and then releasing a picture of your Batman in a costume that's basically lifted from the page of Dark Knight Returns, something I've already formed an opinion on, it's hard for me to stay open-minded. I already know how I feel about the Dark Knight Returns and that story and that world and that art and all that stuff. And the fact that you haven't come out and said any other Batman stories or influences is basically leading me to believe that that's your only source for Batman. And again, I can't stress this enough. The Dark Knight Returns is great. You should read it if you haven't. Hell, I own it. But this is not the end-all, be-all version of Batman. And to prove it, next week I'll list 5 other lesser-known Batman stories that are just as definitive as this, if not maybe more so. So make sure you subscribe to this channel so you catch that video as soon as it airs. Cheap plug. Also, like and share this video if you'd be so kind. So thank you very much for watching, and until next time, have a good week. I mean, how crazy is that? Just a few years ago, we'd have a couple of cartoons based on comic books, and that's about it. Now, every other week, a show is being announced that's based on a comic book or a superhero. I mean, even Heroes is coming back. Because why not? For those of you who are dumb,
It's me.
Power Rangers took footage from the Japanese show
I knew
Super
that.
Sentai.
I knew that.
And
I knew.
basically spliced it in with footage of American actors doing American things, and then when it came time to the Power Rangers, they took the footage from Super Sentai and just spliced it together to try and make a half-an-hour kids show.